morning and welcome to the course Introduction to Interaction Design. So, in the last session we saw a case study of one of my students and we saw how she used the double diamond approach to identify the problem where the task given was to design a website for tourism of Uttarakhand state. So, we saw how the process of problem identification and then different aspects of the user interface like the icons, logos, how that developed to come up together to form the final output. So, today we will be looking at the visual interface design and so when we see art or visual interface design or any other design discipline which deals with design like industrial design, interaction design. So, we can see that there are some commonalities. We can see that some theories and some frameworks may be quite similar. So, art as we know is has been evolving over the past many decades, many centuries. The first incidences were of the cave paintings. So, we know that how ancient the whole practice of expressing oneself was in the form of art, and whereas computers and the interface is relatively very new concept. So, although for an untrained eye the art that we see may not make sense at times, but there is a certain structure, there is a certain hierarchy and certain use of elements that goes into it. There are certain principles that make it an interesting piece of art for us to observe. So, whether it is Da Vinci's work or Dali or Van Gogh, so we will see that there is a system in the way they have put the elements together, the way the colors have been selected. So, it is not like any element has just been placed in any random place, but there is an organized way in which the art has been created so that it can communicate the meaning and we can as viewers enjoy the art and identify or perceive it the way we may, because everybody may perceive them differently. But the difference between art and visual design broadly is that the artist is sort of reflecting his observation or feelings. So, it can tend to be a little bit more subjective, but whereas when it comes to the designer or designer who is creating say a visual interface or any kind of interaction between the viewer and the system, so then they are not designing for themselves. So, it is not one's own subjective preferences or priorities really do not have any importance there. So, they are designing for people because the expectation is that a large number of people will be using this particular interface. The area of design, we will see that how the elements are also placed in a certain manner, in a very in a functional manner, in sort of a framework, so that the user is able to interact with them more effectively. So, when it comes to aesthetics and usability, so there is always sort of a debate that what is more important, whether something should be more aesthetic or more usable. So, both these terms go hand in hand in the sense that any interface which is very aesthetically pleasing, but it does not offer the ease of use or a good user experience to the user, then of course, the user will move forward maybe to another such application. The opposite is also true, where the application website may be very functional, may be very usable, very user friendly, but aesthetics may not be very inviting, or they may not be very appealing. So, in that case also the user may prefer another app. So, So it is important for the designer to consider both of these together and come up with a design that fulfills the efficiency and the also the structural aspect of it is taken care of. So just like we have our syntax of language, where we have a structure to a sentence, to a paragraph, to a book. So similarly, when we are creating any user interface, at that time also we have to follow certain language, some design language we have to follow. Just like I mentioned earlier, that how from the area of art we have also, we can say, borrowed some of the concepts and theories, so which sort of help one to align the requirements in a very systematic manner. So in the area of uh, interface design also, we have certain building blocks when it comes to visual design. So we have shape, size, value, hue, orientation, texture, position. So we will be taking them up in the next few slides. So the fundamental elements of design, like line, point, shape, so they form the backbone of the design language of when it comes to the interface design or interaction design or many other communication solutions. So when we use shape with, say, in conjunction with color, so then the shape may reveal meaning and it makes the composition more appealing to the audience. So here we can see a poster on the left side where the combination of color and shape, so dots have been used, alternating blue and pink dots have been used, and then this creates an eye catching pattern, so which draws the eye towards the pink figure that is here and then towards the text. So we can see how the basic the first element of design, which is the dot or the point, how it is able to capture the attention of the user, and of course when it is uh, in conjunction with the color, so it makes it even more appealing, and there is a certain pattern, certain meaning. So we can also see the blue dots and maybe they are the male counterpart, because this pink is the female. So there are many ways in which we can look at this design and make our own assumptions about it. But overall, a point being that it makes the art or the work that we see, it could be in art, it could be a poster, it could be a website application, but it makes it more appealing to us. So another important aspect here is the size. So of course, the bigger the size, the more it will be dominating in the screen. So for example, we have a image area. So how big a space they occupy, of course the eye will move first to what is really pulling our eye. So if it is big and heavy and dark, and of course the color also plays an important role here, because darker the color, the heavier something appears to us. The lighter it is, the light color, it appears to be lightweight. So so now there can be this hierarchy. And another place where this size helps mainly is in drawing the eye, and also it dominates the area where it has been placed. So now dominance is a principle of design, which is wherein where do we want the the viewer to see the area first, where do we want his attention to be drawn on our artwork or our website. So what happens if there is dominance is missing? If there is no dominance, then we can see here in the diagram on the left that when there is no dominance, then there is no direction, because now the viewer doesn't know that where should I look. There is no area which is pulling the attention. So when there is dominance here, in this particular case, it is in terms of these two horizontal lines. So they are offering sort of a contrast, which we'll talk about in the next few slides also. So now this is aiding the viewer in glancing at this area because there is something, some strong association he is seeing between these two lines rather than the vertical lines. Similarly, when we have a different shape or size, so here on the left we can see that all these sizes are almost similar. So, there is nothing which is standing out, but on the right, the minute we add a larger object, then the eye focuses there and then moves around the rest of the space. And lastly, that when even if we are using one dominant shape, but repetitive use of it also is not a very good way of representing, because if there are too many of the big large shape, then again the user will be confused that where is it I am supposed to look. So, there will not be anything to catch hold of their attention. So, in that case, alternating the size or shape can be an essential tool in making sure that whatever we want to represent, it is represented, but we have a certain flow induced in our work. So, value is a very important aspect when it comes to interaction design in terms of how the user is interacting with the screen or the interface in front of them. So, it is known as the lightness or the brightness. So, we can see here that generally we see that there will be a background and a foreground. Even when it comes to our website or application, so we have a background and a foreground. So, foreground is something that is in the front and background is what we perceive to be at the back, and background is generally larger. So, if the foreground image, for example, is light in color and we have a light background, so the visibility will be very poor. Just like when something is very dark, there is a dark background and dark object on it, so it's very difficult to make out the details. So, it is important that there is a certain level of contrast that we bring about in the elements that is on our interface in front of us. So, now this work here is by Albers. It's Albers color studies. Albers was a student of Itten, who was a master in Bauhaus in early 1900s, and you can see that on the left these two green small squares. So, they may be appearing to you as one is darker, one is lighter, but in reality both these small green squares are of the same exact hue and intensity. So, you can take maybe a snapshot and put it together and see, but the reason why they are appearing different is because of the color they are being placed next to. So, it is not just the only the choice of color that contrast has to be there, but also how it will behave when it is kept next to the other colors. So, how the background is on the left and what is the background on the right. So, that is making a lot of difference in how we are perceiving this green color. So, Albers did a lot of work in understanding color, and he also conducted a study wherein asked the students that come back with the color red. So, on the right we can see that how many different color variations are there, because everybody is thinking of a different red. So, if I ask you to maybe pick a color blue, it will be probably ranging from sky blue to maybe a very deep blue, because for everybody the mental image that we get when I say blue, red, yellow, so it may have those variations. So, it is a very subjective quality of color, and it also makes it very, the preference also is very dependent on this subjective quality. Here also in the bottom these three squares we can see that how when we change the background, although when the color remains the same, so this color is same as this and this, but the minute it becomes the background, it starts looking or appearing like something else. And when it is in the foreground, where the light gray is the background and where black is the background, if you compare these two here, so this gray appears very different. So, which color will go in the foreground, which in the background, so that understanding for designers is really important. At the same time, value also helps in making something appear very quickly to the eye. So, grabbing the attention, which is very important when it comes to design of interfaces. So, here in this one we can see that amongst all the black dots we have one grey dot, and here immediately our eye goes on to the red. So, that is the power of contrast, that how amongst all these black dots the red is uh, just pulling our eye towards it. At the same time, value is also very useful in helping in the eye movement. So, we can see on the right that these dots, which now are grey, dark grey, black, they have various tones. So, we can see how they appear to be maybe flickering, just like when on Diwali we put those Diwali lights, string lights, and they don't move, but they are turning on off, and then they give the feeling or appearance that they are sort of forming a pattern, they are lighting up in a pattern. Similarly, when we play around with the value of the color, so we can see that kind of a movement. So, the eye will move along, because now each and every dot is full of interest. There is something different that is being offered here, something different that is being offered here, here. It is not the same monotonous black dot. So, that is another use for the value. So, in this work here we can see that it is the same work, but how the contrasting grey that has been used here, how the overall look and feel of the work has completely changed. So, a lot of iterations in this area will help the designer come up with the best possible option. So, now next element is hue which is also known as color. So, hue is the purest form of the pigment that is there. Now, here we can see in the color wheel that there are several of these colors available here. Now, this color, when we see here, for example, this is the purest form of the color, which means that it has not been adulterated with any other color. There is no shade of grey in this. So, like we saw earlier, at how grey is making a difference in the visual art that we see, but here in the purest hue, it is purely devoid of any kind of adulterant. Similarly, in this green. Now, this particular ring, this ring here is that which is known as the tint. So, tint is when we take the purest color or the hue and we add little bit of white to it. So, when we keep on adding a little bit of white, so the color keeps on becoming lighter in color, and till the point that it reaches the color white. Similarly, the opposite of it is the tone. This is the tone, this is the tint, tone or the shade. So, in the shade, what happens is that when we add a little bit of black to the pure hue, so it becomes a little duller, and then we keep on adding black to it, it keeps on changing its outlook from a bright yellow, now it is becoming darker and darker till the point it reaches black. So, this is the whole range of tints and shades. Now, this is the Itten's color wheel, and Itten was the mentor of Albers that we saw earlier, and Itten is considered to be a master in the area of colors, an expert in the area of colors, and he also taught at Bauhaus. So, Itten's sort of mentioned that there are many combinations, there are many such colors that when they are put together they form a certain sort of sense, and which the designers or artists they prefer them. But he also was one of the first people to mention that how the personal preferences or the subjectivity of the color is important, and so as the context. Because if we see the context of, say, the color red, now in some cultures the red color is considered to be very auspicious, very lucky, and people wear red in weddings, but in some other cultures it stands for danger or dangerous. So we associate the color red with several of these meanings. Similarly, the color white, in some cultures people wear wedding gowns of white color, but in other cultures people wear white when there is some inauspicious activity that has happened. So we can see that how the designer has to be very mindful that what is the context in which he is designing, who is the audience, and what how do they perceive certain colors from the lens of their particular culture. Now this is an artwork, and we can see that how this has such rich hues. It has a lot of colors put together, but still it does not seem very busy. So what is how has that balance been created? Maybe it is the addition of white, because of which it appears to sort of balance it out. So we can still use a number of colors, but one has to be very careful that are we overdoing it, or when do we stop adding too many colors. Now in an interface, because we want the user to focus, and for this the color is a very strong feature, because it takes us 1/20th of a second to form an opinion. That is how quickly the color can sort of influence our preferences. So for the designer to use it in order to grab their attention, so they have to know that which color and how much. If we use too much, if we use too many colors, so again the purpose may get defeated. So so that understanding that balance is really important when it comes to the use of colors in the interfaces. Now this is another interesting poster, and here we can see that how the color has sort of helped create that movement. So we can actually feel that the body is jerking along the jazz music probably. So how these bits and pieces that are flying, how they are sort of aiding in the movement of this person. So color can be a very strong tool for the designer. And how you can see the color palette, maybe you can go back to the color wheel and see that which color palette has been used here. Another maybe a very good approach to use color is to in case someone is starting out or they are unsure that what dominant color can be there in the color palette. So we have discussed earlier the mood board and slightly the color palette also. So to decide a color palette, there are many ways. There are also many softwares available online these days which help one choose the colors and put them together to see how they will appear. So one can choose, say, a dominant color. Here this is a dominant color, subdominant or subordinate, and the accent color. So this is the proportion in which this whole scheme will be used. So dominant will be used in the majority of the surface or majority of the space, then the subordinate lesser, and accent only in some important places. So these are two examples of how the color schemes can be selected, and pink can be used as an accent for just grabbing the attention. So it will all depend on the purpose of the website. For example, what is the purpose of it? Is it for yoga? Is it for adventure sports? So depending on that, the color scheme, the dominant, subordinate, and the accent will change. So on the left here is an example from a book where maybe you can identify that what are the dominant, subdominant, and subordinate colors that have been used here. So we can see that orange is the dominant color. We can see it here in the text, we can see it here in this large equation, and then we have yellow, and then we have the black. So how the and white, and how the designer has judiciously used these colors, and they are not overpowering, and they are just just helping in catch the attention. So for example, this yellow squares, so they are not in the text, but they are framing the image in such a way that the viewer is looking at the image. So they are catching the detail of the photo, which is here black and white, but still the yellow squares help us focus on the image. So maybe we can also try to maybe you all can try to find out that what is the dominant, subdominant and the accent color in this particular image. So the orientation is basically how are we orienting our say even our interface or the elements of the interface. Now one of the initial elements of design when we begin is the image area or the picture plane. I will just quickly talk about it, that if we have a square image area or a picture plane, then what happens is that our eye is moving along the breadth, our eye is moving along the height, but both of these are equal. The length and the breadth of a square is equal. So there is no direction really for the eye to go into. But when we have a rectangular image area picture plane, then we have a length and then we have a width. So this is not equal, they both are not equal to each other. So in this case the eye gets a direction to move. So if it is placed say in landscape position, then the eye will move along the horizontal line. If it is placed in the portrait or vertical format, then the eye will move top to bottom. And if you notice the interfaces that are around us, they will usually be rectangular. So you will rarely see a square interface. There may be, but generally, I mean, you can reflect back and see that what does a phone look like, what does the computer screen or tablet look like. So also when we are placing the elements now onto this particular image area, so again we can go back to our elements of design, wherein the lines, that how the lines signify certain movements. So when we have horizontal lines, or the line can also mean that anything that is placed horizontally, so it is more stable, it is more balanced, as opposed to something that is, so this is more stable. If we have something which is standing vertically, this is upright in attention position, and when we have something diagonal, so that shows the movement. So just like we have these ice skaters, so when they are skating, so their body is in the diagonal position, so we feel that they might just topple over, but they don't. But that thrill is there, that they might fall. So that uncertainty is there, which keeps the person hooked to the whole event. So similarly, how are we planning to orient our work? So are we using the diagonal line, or are we using vertical columns? Are we using breaking it up? So we will also see this a little bit more later when we talk about the grids or the layout. So texture so is something smooth, rough. So texture helps us see that, it helps us understand or get a feel of it, because we are not able to touch it in 3 dimension, we are looking at it in 2D, but the information that we are getting when there is some sort of a texture, we get the 3-dimensional feel of it. And although the texture takes a number of pixels, but still texture also communicates a lot to the user. So when we are using any, for example, say a tangible product, so for example this pen itself, that where the button is, so here there is some texture is different, so I know, so it's telling there is a affordance in this product which is telling me that this needs to be pressed, or the grip, I need to grip it in a certain manner to get which is rubberized here. So similarly when we are in the zone of the interface, there also the buttons, if they are for example textured, or they have some kind of lines on them, so we know that we have to sort of drag them or pull them. And when they are like, say they have beveled edges or they have some drop shadows, then that means that these buttons probably need to be clicked. So the appearance also tells us that how this particular product needs to be interacted with. So, position is the arrangement and placement of the elements within the layout or the composition. So, you can see here three different examples are there, one of a mobile, tablet and desktop, and all of them sort of provide us with a very different sort of a space. So, and then they all come with their own challenges and their own advantages. So, where in a desktop we have more space, so we can position, we have much more free hand in putting a lot of information there because of the real estate being much larger there as compared to the mobile. But the challenge is also to ensure that the user is able to locate, because now the surface is large. So, how does he move around to identify what he is looking for? So, but then it also gives the freedom to sort of organize the layout in a hierarchy, whether we are using the modular system or the columns or the hierarchical. So, it gives the user that freedom, the designer that freedom, that they can sort of organize them in that manner. In the phone, for example, as you can see in this diagram also, that how these all the functions are like stacked together, because now here the scrolling motion will be used quite a bit as opposed to the desktop. So, what will come in the first page, how much do we scroll to go to the next. So, all those decisions the designer will have to take. So, once we land on the mobile, for example, so what should be in the top, what should come in the top, what is the most important information that one should not have to scroll down to get to. So, all those decisions become very important when the positioning changes, when these the whole space changes. So, coming to the principles of visual interface design. So, just like in other areas like even art, there are certain principles, visual principles, Gestalt's principles and others. So, similarly in visual interface design, what are those certain principles that we used to see? So, there are certain ways and certain steps that the designer can take which will help make the experience for the user very much enhanced. So, some techniques are that hierarchy is important, that how are we putting or grouping the elements together so that there is a clear hierarchy, because it is then easier for the user to spot what it is they want to interact with first. Then the other is that how to give the structure and flow. So, just like in a story there is a certain flow that Ram went to the jungle, then Sita got kidnapped. So, when that has a flow, so similarly in the interaction also there has to be a flow. If I am attempting something and then there is a break in it and then it is somewhere else, so that is going to give me a very poor experience, because I will be left confused that what happened, why, how, where is this, how do I search for it. So, and since we are focusing on the experience and also the efficiency, so it becomes very important that we follow the structure very well. Then also the imagery, if you are using any type of images, you are using any type of illustrations or any type of, even I would say buttons and icons and color, so they have to have a consistency. They cannot, we cannot have one thing on one page and something else on the other page. So, that that connectivity has to be maintained. So, if there is a color palette, so on one page one has to follow the color palette, on second page we cannot just come up with a new dominant, subordinate and accent colors. That can happen in certain cases also, that sort of is a possibility, but for that also it has to somehow link with something. There has to be some element which is following through the entire story, which is linking it together. The next is the style and function. So, of course, the style and function, they both have to go hand in hand together for the interface and the interaction to be seamless, and avoid visual noise and clutter. So, of course, the too much of something, too much of a certain color, too much of a certain shape, too much of the same image also will not really help in grabbing the attention or keeping the attention of the user. So, we have to be careful that how much of what needs to be used. So, coming to the hierarchy, as we can see here, that how there is a thick line, then thinner and much thinner, and how the color is also changing, the hue is changing. So, based on the scenario, so we have to determine which controls and the pieces of data user needs to understand instantly, that when a user is visiting our website or our application, what is it that they are looking for, what is it that they would want to find immediately. So, that we have to determine, and then what would they look for next. So, for example, if I am already a user, I would probably want to identify login, for example. So, if I am going to if I can't find login and I am looking around for it, so that will leave me maybe frustrated. So, what is it I will do first, what is it I will do second. So, scenarios need to be created, which we have discussed earlier also, that how, in what scenario. So, scenario 1, this action needs to be taken. Scenario 2, now the user wants to take this action. Scenario 3. So, then we come to know that how do we prepare the hierarchy of our visual elements, including color and shape, size, everything, so that the user is able to identify based on their priority the particular elements. Then establishing a relationship. So, the elements need to have some sort of a relationship. They cannot be like, we can't have 5 different stories in one place. There has to be sort of a link between the elements. So, that is what the elements are doing. They are creating a whole story for us. So, we cannot have 5, 10 different things happening where there is no connection between them. So, the elements have to be connected, a relationship needs to be formed, and that will help in the visual hierarchy, it will help in the consistency, in the usability factor of the application or website, and the visual balance will also be maintained, as well as the clarity for the user. So, all these need to be taken into account, and also we cannot forget that the emotional impact that we have talked about in the earlier lecture also, that how the user needs to connect emotionally. So, we have to keep that in mind also, that how will our work emotionally impact the user. Now, alignment and a grid is probably one of the most important things to begin with. So, if we have a nice aligned and properly designed layout, then we have to place our elements there. So, we cannot think of the layout at the end of the whole process, because then we will be left with some sort of a confusion. Now, there are broadly 3 types of layouts that we use. So, one is the modular layout, where we have these different modules in a layout. Then we have the column. So, let me just draw this one more time. So, you can think of modules like different modules like this, where we have gutters in between. So, this gutter is a white space here and horizontally as well. So, this gutter along with the periphery of the layout will form the background. So, which we have discussed, that how background and foreground, that relationship is very important. So, it will form the background, and the whatever is here will be the foreground. Okay, so now in the modular, as we know, the modules that modules can just click the same module, like stackable chairs, for example, one chair on top of the other. Similarly, in these modules we can take these individual modules and put some information here, or we can also combine these modules. So, we can take 2 of them together, or we can take 3 of them vertically, but this needs to be sort of thought out before, and we cannot like change this when we go to the next page. So, because the viewer will expect something, like for example, if I have kept, say I have kept my button here, some important button is here. So, the user will expect that in when they scroll down, they will find another important meaningful button in the same place. So, if it is not there, then they will be left confused. So, we have to ensure that this grid that we are using, this layout we are using, is sort of consistent. The other is the column layout, where we have columns, the information is in the columns vertically, and it can also be laid out horizontally. So, the information is displayed horizontally or vertically, that is another way to do it. And the third is the hierarchical, where we sort of make a hierarchy of elements of the spaces, and that the more important information will come here, then we will have some image here, maybe some larger image here, some text here, some more text here. So, depending on our what we are designing for, so the layout can be chosen, and but it should be considered that we should not mix too many layouts, because that is just going to break the readability of our work. So, from one to the other, when the grids change, the user will be left confused. Now, symmetrical and asymmetrical balance. So, like for example, if you have seen the Taj Mahal, so Taj Mahal is a symmetrical structure. So, you see it from the entrance, we can draw a line through the middle of it, both the parts will be same. There are many other such symmetrical you know, structures, buildings, even in paintings we see some sort of symmetry at times. So, and layout also, like here on the left we can see that this is a symmetrical layout. Now, symmetrical layout is a good way to sort of portray our work, nothing wrong with that. But in the symmetrical balance, where if we draw a line like here we have, both sides are exactly the same, then what happens is that it can lead to some monotony, can lead to the layout not being very excited. So, there is no dominant element that is pulling our attention. But when we have an asymmetrical balance, which means that it still needs to be balanced somewhat, it cannot, whether it is with the shape, with color, with text, with any other element, but there it is balanced. So, here we can see that how they are balancing each other diagonally, and there may be some text here maybe. So, now in this particular case, it is not something which is very expected, it is not something that is that somebody will predict, not predictable. So, something that will give us a little bit of an excitement, suddenly something comes here, or you know, but we have to keep a fine balance between that also, because earlier slide we saw that how layout is important and how we cannot keep on changing the layout. But in the same layout, the image can keep on shifting the place. We can take, for example, 4 of those modules, place an image there, but on the other, when we scroll down, we can use the other 4 you know, modules, for example. So, it is up to the designer how they want to treat it, but the asymmetrical balance makes the work just a little bit more exciting to see, because it becomes less predictable. So, here we can see 2 examples, 2 websites. So, on the left we can see how the information is symmetrically placed. If we draw a line, we will cut across equally both sides. So, it is probably it is for you know, some very calm activity. On the right we can see a yoga studio, but it appears to be a very dynamic yoga studio, because the image that is here, and I discussed the skaters earlier, that how this body is in a position where it may topple over. So, now this is an example of how the elements have been placed asymmetrically, because the image is here, then we have the text here talking about it, whereas here we on the left we have this equivalent to this. Now, all through our the website, whether it is website or whatever interaction it is, so one has to think that how is the user going to approach our work, how are they going to read our work, how are they going to move around in our work. Like I said earlier, that the Sita cannot be kidnapped before the Ram even goes to the forest. So we cannot make the user find something at the bottom and then come up and continue working. So, so what is the logical sequence? How will the information be displayed? What kind of steps the user will need to take, and how will he move about these steps? So, all of this needs to be considered. So, now this is a study which was done by the Norman group, and one technique which is used by a lot of web developers is of eye tracking, that how is the user actually looking at their website. So, it gives us very valuable insights that what is the way in which the human eye starts looking at the text or starts reading or takes the information of the website in. So, it is also dependent on the culture, because in some cultures, in some areas of the world, we read left to right, but in some areas people read right to left. So, who are we designing for also needs to be considered. If we are making a laptop and or any sort of a document, Word software for example, but the one is forced to write left to right, then people who write right to left, then for them it becomes unusable. Anyway, so eye tracking was used here, and so what it showed was, you can see that when humans are reading any text, document or website, so they read in an F pattern. So, what that means is that they will start from the left, they will go towards the right, then they will come back here, and then they will scan, and then they will follow like that. So, you can see a little F forming here, and similarly here also. So, we can see the F forming here. So, that is how the humans read. So, eye tracking actually has been used, it is a very useful tool, like even in during the time when Japan was in war with USA. So, at that time also, because lot of men were being killed by the gunshot to the head. So, what they did was that they designed their uniform in such a way that the flag of the Japan, which is the red dot, it was on their chest area. So, now in the middle of the jungle, when everything is green and they are wearing a uniform or their army uniform with red on their chest, so the enemy will immediately grab the red color and they will shoot. So, the person will get wounded, the soldier will get wounded, but he will not die, because the chest has been hit, so it can still be treated. But if the bullet goes to the head, so the survival chances are almost next to 0. So, that is how we have evolved, and we have tried to understand that what and how the user or the viewer perceives things, or what catches their attention, and how can we grab their attention, how can from instead of this, how can we make them see this. So, the same information can be applied here with the help of eye tracking and others, some systems. We can efficiently see that if this is the pattern the user is using to read, then maybe we should place this important information in this segment, and the secondary information here, and tertiary information in the place where they will look next. So, with this we will stop here today, and in the next lecture we will talk about some elements of user interface. So, I will see you in the next session. Thanks.